sometimes there's something greater than our fear that requires us to shift the entire atmosphere, to flip over that proverbial table, to say, you know what? This isn't working. We need to build something better. We may not know exactly how we're going to do it, but that's the North Star and the goal. If I don't do this, if I don't disrupt what's right in front of me, the person next to me can't also do what they're supposed to be doing, because we're all connected.
Welcome to Deeply Well, a soft place to land in your journey. A podcast for those that are curious, creative, and ready to expand in higher consciousness and self-care. Thank you for joining us. This is where we heal. This is where we become. I am Devi Brown. Welcome back to the Deeply Well podcast. I am so glad to have you here. And you know, I think gratefully now more than ever, so many in the world are feeling that deep call, that deep little seed deep within yourself, feeling the push to step into a more expanded version of authenticity in your life. A lot of questions are coming up for people inside of themselves as the world seems to be spiraling in so many ways, and we're realizing what truly matters and what really never did. So I'm so excited this episode to dive even more deeply into that thought and into that process with an absolutely incredible guest today. Today's guest, Alencia Johnson, is an award-winning cultural commentator, author, political advisor, and leader at the intersection of social impact and cultural change. Uniquely experienced at marrying cultural cornerstones, advocacy, politics, corporate, and entertainment, her debut book, Flip the Tables, The Everyday Disruptor's Guide to Finding Courage and Making Change, is coming out in just a few weeks. You can pre-order it as you listen to this episode. She's worked for presidential campaigns of President Barack Obama, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and was a senior advisor to President Biden and Vice President Harris's 2020 campaign. Alencia also held national roles at Planned Parenthood and Geico, leading efforts in each organization to address systemic issues facing marginalized communities through brand engagement and narrative strategies. Alencia is a sought-after thought leader and cultural critic, regularly featured on MSNBC, CNN, NBC, BET, NPR, Washington Post, Essence, Glamour, and more. Ooh-wee! She been doing work in the world. Welcome to the show, Alencia.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you here. I remember, I think this was either the first or one of the first times we met this past year in Florida at Kimberly Blackwell's incredible event that she puts on every year for women, Elevate Her. And I remember you're like, I love Deeply Well. And I was like, girl.
Yes. Literally, I was like, oh my gosh, I love Deeply Well. And then remember you were talking about use the whole bag of Epsom salt.
Yes, use the whole bag, sis.
And that really spoke to me because I love my Epsom salt baths. And I felt so seen. So I was so excited to see you there and finally meet you and just what you bring in general to all of us, but especially to that space of just boss business women who really needed to center themselves. So it was a great meeting.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You have quite an offering coming to the world. I mean, wow. You know, we just I was able to really beautifully list off such a gorgeous life that you've lived, and a life that is really deeply rooted in service and impact, but also it requires, right? Like a life that big, a life that meaningful requires so much of you and so many facets of who you are. And so, you know, when we spoke recently, and I was so excited to get a copy of your book, Flip the Tables, this cover is gorgeous. You know, this is powerful. Your book is called Flip the Tables, The Everyday Disruptor's Guide to Finding Courage and Making Change. What gave you the call to write this book now?
Ooh, when I think about where I was a few years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, you read my beautiful bio, and I have been so blessed to have a career that I believe is creating impact and teaching people how to disrupt in the world. And I don't take lightly that God chose me to do all of these things. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of the pandemic, that was after Senator Elizabeth Warren had ended her presidential campaign. And I decided to go stay with my parents. As I said, I'm not staying in Boston by myself. We don't know what's happening here with this pandemic. And I wasn't working again yet, but I was just figuring things out, which I know is a privilege. And I had this download from God very clearly about one of my favorite stories of Jesus when he went in the temple and flipped over tables, hence the title of the book. But I started interrogating that and thinking, well, what made Jesus really so frustrated that he wanted to flip over tables in the temple that's supposed to honor his Father? And then I went even broader and said, well, wait a minute. What would make all of us get to a place that we are willing to flip over a table, a proverbial table? And so I was really wrestling with that throughout the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. While I was also I had some prayer circles with some girlfriends and really thinking about what I wanted to do next. I was looking through my own life. I was thinking about relationships and how for some reason I was dating the same person, but they were all different guys. And I was like, well, why is this all the same? And then why is this all the same? Why is this all the same, but none of them know each other?
Oh my God.
And then thinking about that always happens, which is why writing the book, I had to actually talk about some of, my relationship not struggles, but journeys, right?
Yeah, your experiences.
My experiences. And then at the same time, you listed off, you talked about all of the things I'd done in my career. I was thinking about what I wanted to do next and how I felt a little stifled. And to be honest, I felt like I hadn't even reached my fullest potential or wasn't even doing the things that I wanted to do. Physically, I wasn't feeling the best. I had gained a lot of weight and I had lost all of the amazing habits that I thought I had picked up. There was just a lot happening in my own life. Yeah. And this question kept coming of, how do I create impact in the world? So it's the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, this election, so many things are happening. And the answer to that question of how do I create impact in the world, it starts with healing myself. Mm-hmm. And I took myself through this journey. Now, mind you, I did not know that concept and idea was a book. My agent, shout out to Trinity, she reached out to me at the end of 2020 and I was like, sure, I have a book in me. Said that, didn't know that what I was going through was the actual book. I knew it was called Flip the Tables. And I said, okay, sure, I'll write this guidebook for people who want to sow more good in the world, because I believe that our purpose here on earth, when we are who we are supposed to be, it actually is in service to one another, right? Yeah. It is in community, it is relational, it is to advance society. But how do we get there? Well, it starts with self. And I had to go through my own journey of disrupting myself and disrupting my vision of what's possible and then disrupting my community. And so it took 2 years to write the proposal. And then it took a good year to actually write the book. But it was so divinely orchestrated to happen at the parallel time that I literally was taking myself through the first part of this book, this disruption of self and disruption of vision of what's possible. And God was like, you have to be very vulnerable, especially as someone who I know that so many people, especially Black women, look to me and see all of these amazing professional things I've done. And here I am breaking down myself and saying, I'm not content. There are things I'm missing in life, whether it's time with family or time with self, right? Mm-hmm. Or having less time in the office and more time to do frivolous things that bring me joy, things that allow for me to rest, right? Things that will heal me physically and spiritually. And so that's where it came from. It's literally the book that I needed when I was going through a bout of depression and anxiety at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really powerful. And, a friend of mine, a healer friend of mine, something he had said to me years ago is when God gives you the title for the book, then the next few years are the book. you know, and I feel like, and myself in my process, it very much was that, even though I had so much to talk about already and so many life experiences, but God is like, okay, good. Now let's get your middle. Now let's get let's find your ending to this book. Let's bring your life together in a way that you can embody everything that you are saying and teaching to other people. And it takes you through that really like beautiful and really hard and sometimes like very anxiety filled and, you know, tearful.
Yes. I mean,
experience.
Literally you saying this, that is exactly what it is, because several points when I'm writing this book, I'm like, girl, why didn't you just write a book about the women's movement? What are you doing here? Because I was going through all of that. When I was reading the audiobook, I was in tears. Mind you, I'd written and edited and approved all of the stuff.
You read it 10 times already?
I have. I've sent it to people to get their feedback, and I'm reading it in tears. And even some of the stuff is still challenging for me to read and experience again, but it is my hope in the book that we get to a place of understanding that that's okay. That's the process, right? Like, it's actually a good thing that you feel emotions about our experiences. But Devi, it took me so long to get there, especially I'm a Virgo, I'm a type A person. We like to run from our feelings. No, it's actually good to sit in that.
Yeah. Not just good. It's like, that's God's intention.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what's so beautiful and what you express really powerfully in the book. It's like giving yourself that agency to not just be one thing, right? I don't have to be the perception that is crafted or the version of me that everyone is kind of projecting onto me. Like, I am having my human experience and it is faceted.
It's so faceted and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? And it's something for us to interrogate. So I have been in and out of therapy most of my life. I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 15. I had a nervous breakdown in college, and I talk about some of this in the book. And so I've been in and out of therapy for years, but it finally took me sitting and saying, I have the tools already. Go try this on your own. And you're not a problem that needs to be fixed. You are this complex, beautiful human to accept and embrace. And that journey has been...
That's right.
So much. But it's been so rewarding and so powerful, right? And that, the courage and the confidence that comes from that, I want all of us to experience.
Yeah, God, that's beautiful. You know, it's so interesting. It's like in this day and age, I mean, I think so many words get really trendy, right? Like really fast. And we all seem to have, in general, very different definitions for the words many of us commonly use, right? Like the word love is defined very differently by each of us and many of the words. And I think one of the words now that people can appropriate for whatever intention they want is the word authenticity, right? Like I see some people using that word as a way to kind of continue to promote bad behavior because they're like, this is my authentic self. And it's like, that's not really what it is, right? Like what you're describing is what the truth of authenticity is, right? It's the peeling back the layers. It's giving self permission to not fit and we never could, not attempt to fit a perfect, right? Like being able to say, I feel like crying, so I will cry. I feel like yelling, so I will yell. Today, I'm a little depressed. Today, wow, I feel really powerful and ready to serve and use my skills. And it's like, that's the heart of what it is to be an authentic woman, to be, you know, a servant leader. It's connecting all of that. Your book is centered around the idea of disruption. Can you define what it means to be a disruptor in today's world, especially for women that are navigating this personal space and this professional space and trying to find a way to be who they really are in both?
I love that you led into that question with what it truly means to be your authentic self. Because for me, and I spent a lot of time at the beginning of the book defining disruption and reclaiming it, because I feel as though, as we've been talking about how words have shifted meaning, right? And it became a buzzword and you would hear it in very business terms. And to be honest, people involved with the book were like, maybe you shouldn't actually put that on the book cover. And for me, I had always danced with the word because as someone who grew up, my dad's a pastor, I'm a Black Christian, and then also in this change-making space, we embrace the word disruption. But I had to really interrogate, what does that mean? For me, it is intentionally tearing something down to build something better. And I imagine the Tasmanian devil, Looney Tunes, right? He was just going through town, barreling through with no plan, no concept of why he's just destroying. That's not a disruptor. A disruptor understands that something can actually be a lot better, and this is no longer serving us. And women who want to be disruptors, and I believe that we are by nature, right? Our very existence, for the most part, especially women of color, is disruptive. We know that when we walk into a room with our authentic self, we can shift the entire atmosphere. That might be with something we say or who we bring to the table or whatever it may be. And so the first step of disruption for me, and that's what I had to work through in the book, is us having the courage to be ourselves. And I intentionally use courage instead of fearless because sometimes that fear doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And courage reminds us that there's something greater than our fear. And as a disruptor, sometimes there's something greater than our fear that requires us to shift the entire atmosphere, to flip over that proverbial table, to say, you know what, this isn't working. We need to build something better. We may not know exactly how we're going to do it, but that's the North Star and the goal. And it's also connected to the fact that if I don't do this, if I don't disrupt what's right in front of me, the person next to me can't also do what they're supposed to be doing because we're all connected. We're all interconnected.
Yeah. Oh, that is a really, really powerful understanding to come to, because it's like, and it's why we all have to use our gifts and do the work.
Yeah.
You know, do the work you've been avoiding. God requires it. Because it's like if you don't become yourself, the people around you can't.
No.
If you don't do what you're here to do, you're disrupting that chain, that domino effect. And what isn't getting birthed because you won't be yourself.
That's right. And how can I face God and not have used the gifts that he has entrusted me with, right? Like, how can I answer the question of, did you do what you were supposed to do on this earth?
Yeah.
If I stayed in my own way. One of my good friends, as I was working through my proposal, the proposal took longer than actually writing the book. I had a good friend of mine. He would call me like once a month and he would be like, how's the proposal going? What's going on? And one day he literally said, Alencia, you're selfish. I said, excuse me? He said, the world needs this book more than more than the roadblocks that you have in your life. He said, we need this book, and you are being selfish with what God has told you to put out in the world. And when I tell you that convicted me, and it pushed me to a place of, I'm crying through proposal notes. I'm like, God, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But in essence, I was living what I'm telling everyone to live, right?
Yeah.
That, something bigger than me, bigger than my fear is requiring me to go forward and do this.
Okay, everybody listening, take a breath. Sit with that for a second. We'll revisit this later in the episode, but where are you being selfish? Where are you not listening? Where are you not doing what you're called to do? I think we're in another one of those times because there are years of activations that happen on this planet, really intentionally. This is what I've observed within my spiritual awakening. There are different activation points that happen every so amount of years, right? Where the people that need to speak, the people that need to teach are activated in new ways. And I identified for myself like 2010, 2012, 2016, 2020, and now this moment, 2025, feels to me where I've kind of observed in my own process and in seeing other people who have birthed the important works, that these were years that have been really important to humanity. And I remember when 2020 first came, and I was already working in wellness and all the things, but God gave me this sentence that I started posing with my students and I started putting on social media, which was, who are you being called to become right now? And I had launched this program called the Divine Timeout, because I remember the second I heard the pandemic orders come down, I was like, oh, this is an opportunity.
Yes.
People are about to become themselves.
Yes.
People are going to get to sit with the truth of who and what they are in the best ways and in the really challenging ways. And they're going to be able to emerge from whatever this container is. Hopefully, if you do the work, if you sit in it, if you be with it, there is profound opportunity to come to the other side of this isolation and these home orders as who you are actually meant to be.
Yes.
And it's just really powerful, because it's like, though I know you have had a very layered life, and I'm certain God has spoken to you about so many things, so many times, but it's interesting because if we look at what I'm trying to really spotlight is the importance of listening when you hear it, right? Because you heard this book in 2020. You then spent time becoming who you needed to be to birth this in the way that would free and unlock people. And right now in this year of our Lord 2025, my God, my God, my God, my God, the world is changing. And we have to get really freaking clear.
Yeah.
And so your awakening and you listening when you needed to is now coming into this moment 5 years later, which is, dare I say, one of the most pivotal moments in human history.
Yes.
One of the most pivotal moments in human history. And at the bare minimum, one of the most pivotal moments in this country. And now there are resources and tools for who's ready to be awakened right now to then pass the baton to continue the work. So it is so important that you listen. It is so important that you listen and do your work. Do your work.
Yeah. Oof. Oof. Devi, I'm like feeling and receiving everything that you're saying, because, and I'm about to get emotional, if I hadn't been obedient, right? Like if I had not been obedient in the going through and the facing myself and the being honest with myself in ways that, quite frankly, even my loved ones at the time couldn't understand, right? And thank God I have so many friends and family who are like, I don't get this, but I support you. Whatever this journey is that you're on, I support you. But if I wasn't obedient, this book wouldn't be coming out at a time when people are looking for a guide to navigate, and a guide that gives them permission to actually go inward a bit before you face the world, right? Like there's a whole section, Disruption of Community, that talks about ways that we can, seemingly small ways that actually help with disruption, but it's the going through and our journey first. And I write a little bit about something that you said about how the pandemic was an opportunity. And that's what I felt too. I said, okay, thank you, God, that I can hang out with my parents for several months and like I can work from home and they're retired. So we had our base level of needs met, that we could actually take that time and really have conversations that were needed. I could focus on myself in ways that I hadn't before. I could realize that, you know what? I don't need to achieve anything else. I say that as I'm putting a book out, but I don't need to achieve anything else. I don't need to fly across the country every other week because I need to be at this meeting or be in the mix. I actually want to go hiking with my friends. I actually want to go on vacation. I want to have a life. You want to
build a life.
Yes. Yeah. A life that, quite frankly, Devi, in the going through over these years, there was a moment, and I'm just so blessed that as an entrepreneur, I have been successful. I immediately got all of the, are you building this big agency? And how much money are you raising? And I was like, wait. That's not actually what I want to do. Like, I want the freedom of time. And there's a way that I can do this that serves me. So I was pushing against that. And then I was in my new place at the time, and beautiful place, had all the clothes, all the things. And I remember sitting in my bedroom outside of my closet, and I was like, this is great, but like, am I really happy?
Yeah.
Like, am I really happy with all of the things, with all of the accolades? Am I really happy here? And that breaking down helped get this book. And it got me to a place of, when the world opened up, there are a lot of people that we know who got immediately back into their pre-pandemic selves on flights, at events, doing all the things. And I'm like, have we not learned our lessons?
I was actually shocked.
Me too.
To see how many people instantly went back to that.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I thought that was going to bring a little more.
Me too.
Yeah.
But you know what I think some of it is, Devi? Is so many of us are scared to sit with ourselves. We are running from ourselves.
God. It's the hardest thing.
It's the hardest thing.
That's what the work of our lives is.
It is.
Yeah.
And I stopped being scared of myself. I'm like, wow, you were scared of yourself? Like, to sit with yourself? It's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. It's okay that this childhood trauma that happened to you when you were 6 years old, it still impacts you. That's reminding you that you are human.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I actually don't want to be numb to emotions. And again, for me as a Virgo to say that is a lot to not be numb to my emotions. And again, if I wasn't obedient, I always want to be in a place where I can hear God, whether clearly or through signs. And something that came to me even before the pandemic was that I don't actually want a full plate. Because if I have a full plate, that means not only isn't there, if there isn't room for me to do some of the things that I want to do, but there's also no room for God to use me in the ways that he needs me to be used.
You have to have space.
You have to have space.
Yeah.
And I have been pushing and creating that space. And I want to give us all the permission to do that, because to your other point about this moment we're in, especially right now as a country and as a world, we have to have the space to show up in community, to do what we need to do to get us to the other side of that together.
Have to. Yeah. Yeah. So interesting to me about, creating the spaces. I talk with so many people about this. So many people that fill their lives, are always like making these plans, or even having these, and this is not, sometimes this serves purpose, but when we're overly attached to goals or building out these like long timelines of how life should go, for me, that really illustrates a deep lack of faith in God, a deep lack of faith in your life. Because when you are faithful, you get the message, you get the call, and then you create the space for it, because you know you're not meant to carry all of it or understand all of it right away, especially when you're building something you haven't been yet.
Yeah.
So it's like taking some of that pressure off to make the space to let God move in your life and actually build what is desired, because it is in service to more than just you and to other people. But if you find yourself, and I'm saying this for whoever needs it listening right now, if you find yourself looking to fill every single inch of your time, there's something to look at.
Yeah.
You know, something needs your attention within yourself. And it's time to start investigating your relationship with your nervous system and your relationship with the need to be distracted at all times.
And that's the work that I end up having to do.
Yeah.
And even now when I go through bouts of, I feel like my career is in sprints, like there are short spurts where it's like extremely busy and chaotic. Yeah. And then it kind of levels out to the point where sometimes I'm bored. But I've learned to sit in boredom with nothing to do. But in those chaotic times, I found that I have to cling closer to myself and create the space to meditate, to pray, to get in deeper relationship with my maker, because that is what's going to help me navigate that, right? And you mentioned lack of faith, and I write about that in the book. There's a chapter called Sometimes the Red Flag Is You. And I had to really list out all of the things that I was doing to get in my own way. And one of those things was having a lack of faith. And I was apologizing to God. I was like, oh my God, how am I doubting you? And then I realized, well, if you gave me the vision, then I just have to trust that it's going to happen, that it's all going to fall into place. And the more that I surrender my thought process on how it's supposed to work out, I surrender against what everyone else says, the easier it is to actually walk in what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right? The easier it is to be obedient. But that lack of faith piece, I had to wrestle with that for a lot because I was constantly questioning why certain things weren't working out, trying to figure out things. And I kept hearing, but do you trust me? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, right. I have to learn to trust you. Mm-hmm. And I have to accept who I am today and have the courage to walk into spaces, to put ideas out there, trusting that if I've been called here, it is actually going to work out the way that it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. As you were diving into some of those like inner chambers of who you were, what surprised you the most?
One of the things that really surprised me, and I had a therapist work with me on this, was how harsh I was on myself, and can still be, right? I had a therapist who, she said to me one time, did you go to law school? And I was like, no, girl, like, what are you asking me this for? And she said, there's this judge in here. And I didn't think that that was your career, but I just wanted to make sure. And I was like, ooh, the read. Okay. And so she would constantly point out, there's that judge, because I would use the word should, or I should be doing this, or they should be. And what was reflected back onto me was how I had such high expectations of myself. And I've worked through the difference between expectations and standards. I can have high standards, but these expectations that were impossible for me to meet for myself was also putting the people around me in positions of like, well, we could never meet her expectations of her or who we're supposed to be. Ooh. And I had to really sit with that of like, why are you hiding behind these arbitrary expectations? What conditioned you this way, right? And that took some grieving of who I was. That took some understanding of how I was raised. That took some grace for how Black parents of a certain age had to protect their children, right? And like what that looks like and what happens in the church and all of these things I had to work through to really stop judging myself and release those expectations so I could release my expectations of other people as well as let them embrace who I am. And one of the things that I constantly say, and I would say it in relation to romantic relationships, but I actually then realized that it was in relation to all of my relationships, is that I want to be in a place where it feels safe to feel fully seen, to be fully seen. But what requires that is some courage to actually put yourself out there, right? Woo! And so I kept saying it, Devi, and then I kept being confronted with spaces to be seen and friendships and dating and even in like workspaces. And I heard this little word of, but this is what you wanted. Like, we're getting rid of this judge and we're being fully seen.
Yeah.
And it's been bumpy, but it's been so beautiful and rewarding.
And it really is the most special part. You know, it's very cringy when you're in the midst of it. Like, oh my God, how many times you make yourself cringe at yourself. You're like, oh God, girl.
Wanting to apologize. You're like, ooh, my bad.
She a mess. But then it's like, you know, and I don't know if you feel this way, but you look back years later and it's a once in a lifetime thing when you're in it. And it feels like forever when you're in the midst of it. But then you miss it because it's like, my God, the way you bloomed, like the way you unfolded and unfurled and came to life. And like, you know, that perfect word, the way every time you had the courage to keep practicing. Because when we ask God for something, especially to be a better person, you actually have to get your reps up. You have to get in all the opportunities for practice that refine you enough to be that. That's right. And it's like, it's gnarly, but it's so special. And then you're like, oh, I'm bringing all of my skills. Like all of that I can bring into this too. I'm not walking in like a little lamb. Like I can walk in with the skills, with the insight, with the depth that I've amassed. and apply it to me here.
You said refining. It makes me think about, in the Bible, it talks about us being refined like gold. And so often we want God to bring us to a certain place, but we don't think about the going through, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to go in the furnace to be refined as pure gold, right? And that is actually really important. And that journey, I used to want to run away from that tough journey. But to your point, it's the reps. It's the getting the reps in that eventually gets easier. And it reminds you of, I talk about proof points in here of, this is evidence that I can do these hard things.
Yeah.
If I keep doing them, they may not get easier, but you know what? They're less burdensome.
Yeah.
I know that I can overcome again. But what's on the other side of all of that is so worth it. And that is greater than any fear that I have or any apprehension I have of that standing in the mirror, looking at myself when I don't want to. But what's on the other side of that is worth that. And getting to that refined, pure gold is worth going through the furnace.
So this book is just so important. It's just so important. And, as I think about the time that it is coming out and, just quickly, could you even imagine, right, if you didn't listen to that call in 2020 and do all of that refinement, and we came to this moment as someone working in government, in the presidential world, it's like, I'd imagine that would be a full shutdown.
Yeah. Yeah. So Devi, I was at a coffee shop, my favorite coffee shop in Arlington, Virginia, on a Saturday doing some edits. And that was a huge political moment. It was the unfortunate rally where the now president there was an attempted assassination. And I had a moment where, and I'm getting all this pressure from my editors as they're like, you're a little late on these edits. And I said, it would be really irresponsible for me to rush through a lot of this with everything happening in the world right now. And I don't address that specific incident in the book because I don't want to give energy to that person.
Yeah.
But it made me reorient my mind as I was looking through the edits. And God was very clear of like, yes, you were late on those. You understand, you wrote a book too. You were late on those deadlines.
Listen, honey.
You were late because that's what they said, but this is the time, Alencia.
Yeah.
Like this is actually divinely orchestrated for you to be doing these edits through this lens. And then, a couple of weeks later, Vice President Harris becomes the nominee, right? And then I'm working through my final edits in the midst of all of that. And so just the lens of these disruptions happening in the world and knowing that, okay, I'm going to close this book now before the election and it's coming out Women's History Month after the election. How does this book work for either scenarios? And that was my question. I said, okay, God, I just trust you. And had I not been obedient, I might have been like scrambling to write a book right now that doesn't really capture what we are all trying to navigate through, which is trying to navigate ourselves in the midst of trying to navigate this world and how those have to work together and giving people a space to understand that. I said this to I was in another interview and they were asking how my soul is and how my spirit is. I was like, it's optimistic and it's light. And she said, in all of this? I said, yes. I understand the importance of maintaining a healthy soul, as Alice Walker talks about, maintaining a healthy soul in the face of oppression.
Yes.
Now more than ever, that is imperative. And that is our first tool of disruption. And I want to give everyone that permission to cut out the noise, cut out the distractions, stay informed, but really take care of our souls, get deeply well.
Yeah.
To show up when we all get that phone call of, okay, this is what we collectively have to do.
Yeah. 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 It's time. It's time. It's time. Yeah. I am so excited about this book. So excited what it will do for the hearts and the minds and the spirits that connect to it and that stay with the process. At the end of every episode, I like to invite guests to share a piece of soul work with the audience. And this can look like a journal prompt or one of your personal practices for self-reclamation, but something that everyone listening can utilize to really integrate and process everything that they've just heard?
So there's two things that I focus on. One is gratitude, but like real gratitude, not just, oh, I love my meal today, but like thinking of something every single day to have gratitude for. And I do that in prayer. Some people do that in their journals. And then two, I have learned to connect more with nature. And so daily walks, even if it's for 15 minutes, getting outside in nature, those are the two things. And they're so simple. They don't cost any money.
Yeah.
And we can do them almost any and everywhere. And they help me in my practice to just stay in myself and to stay well and to be in my spirit.
That is really such a perfect way to connect to regulation, and really connect to who you are. And as anyone is listening, if there's ever moments when you hear some of these techniques and you feel like you'd have anxiety taking a walk by yourself, or you're like, it's not pleasurable to take a walk by myself, it's uncomfortable. That's what the work is. That's the piece that is the work to do. And that's why you need the walk. And as you continue to take that daily walk, those parts of you soften, those parts of you lift, and eventually it becomes a way for you to connect to beauty. And you're out there not in the anxiety of your chest or the boredom or the embarrassment or the awkwardness. It's like, wow, look at that tree. Oh, feel that wind. It's like you get to settle into the truth of who you are on that walk.
And you're mentioning this in walks without distraction. So when I first started walking outside and, this was started to be part of like my daily or as much as possible daily practice, headphones in, listening to music or a podcast or whatever it may be. And sometimes I still do that, but I had to stop and say, why am I distracting myself from my own voice?
Yeah.
What am I running from?
Yeah.
And the more silence I have, oh my gosh, there's so many downloads. I get back from my walks and I'm like, I have this amazing idea. And like this, I just worked through this issue. There's so many things that are so transformative. And the thing I love about whether it's a walk outside or just a practice of gratitude, it allowed for me to let go of, how there was like this period, and even now, like there are always like articles about my morning routine for an hour and I do X, Y, and Z, these rigid routines of self-care. And I'm like, wait a minute, it actually should be a bit more fluid. And I shouldn't be in a space where I feel like I don't feel good about myself because I didn't check off a box of 15 things to do every morning. What are the two things that I can do every single day? And even if I get up one morning because I overslept and I'm like rushing to whatever it may be, I can still stop in my car for 2 minutes and have a moment of gratitude.
Yeah.
Right? I can give myself the grace that, you know what, the routine looks a little differently today, but these are the two things that you committed to, and you can do them anytime, anywhere, and it doesn't have to be so rigid.
Yeah. You got to let the creativity in because that's what God commands of us. It's creation, even in our self-care practices. And, too, to that point about the headphones, I always share with people, if you put on music during your self-care practice, let it be a playlist you don't know. Not your favorite songs, not the songs you know by heart, because they're all connected to memories. And that keeps you filled, right? They're connected to cellular memory. So it keeps you full. But when you let the silence come in, it's not just the silence, it is the synchronicity, the serendipity, the co-creation with the world around you, because you might hear a bird chirping, right? Which is a sound you may not be used to that leads you to a thought, that leads you to a feeling. So it's like it's letting all of God's orchestra come online for you. To really, transform you in those beautifully small but important moments.
So important. So I'm just thinking about now the paths that I usually go on. I'm like, the old me would have never recognized the beauty in all of this. And then I'm recognizing the beauty, and then I'm smiling at people. I'm speaking to people. I'm building community.
Your heart is softening.
Your heart is softening.
It's becoming more open.
And we need so much more of that in the world. So much more. Honestly, I feel like we are where we are in society because there's so many broken people leading in spaces that, quite frankly, they need to take some time and actually heal themselves, which is, part of also what what drove me to write this book. I
Deeply.
realized that there are so many people I would be working with. We're supposed to be doing so much, pouring so much good into the world, and yet we were harming one another because we were not well within ourselves. And my God, I look at these leaders who are making these inhumane decisions, and I'm like, wow, you weren't loved as a child. You were scared of yourself. You were not healed. It's really sad. And so if we can do that, imagine, I mean, we could do that and inspire other people to do that. Just imagine 1 turns into 2, turns into 10, turns into 100, turns into 1,000. That is such a beautiful act of resistance.
Yeah. And that's what the work is. And that's why we all need to be doing it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because even someone gazing at you, not knowing you, your freedom frees them. They see it in you. It frees them, you know, and it's just profoundly important work, and it's God's work. Alencia, thank you so much for joining me. Flip the tables, Alencia Johnson. Get your copy. Bring your journal along. See where it lands. See what it invokes. Connect it to your process. Really grateful for your life. Grateful for your answering of this call. And thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Devi. Thank you for creating the space.
Deeply Well. Hit us on, let me know how you're connecting to this episode at Deeply Well Pod, at Devi Brown. Share this episode with a friend who needs to flip some tables in their life. We'll be back next episode. Namaste.